All right, recording. Let's go back to screen share. Okay, welcome everybody. For those who weren't on before, my name is Christy Morley and I'm the Senior Naturalist here at Wissahickon Trails, and thank you for joining us for iNaturalist for Wildlife Identification tonight. I'm going to try to keep our program to about an hour, hour and a half max. It kind of depends on how many questions people have. But understand if you have to drop off early, I am recording this and we will put it up on our website and our YouTube channel afterwards. So if for some reason you can't stay for the whole thing, it will be recorded for you to go back to in the future. So keep that in mind. For those who are not familiar with us, I saw a lot of names I hadn't seen before in registrations for this. So if you're a first-time joiner to our programs, welcome. We are an environmental nonprofit based in Ambler. We were founded a little over 60 years ago to protect the land and the water of the Wissahickon Creek. We operate in Montgomery County, so you can kind of see our area of influence there. We work with our partners in Philadelphia for the areas of the creek that enter into Philadelphia County, and we really work to protect the land and the water around the creek to help keep that water as clean as possible. We have about 1,300 acres of land that we've saved from development, and on that land we have 12 nature preserves and 24 miles of trails that are open for you to use. Hopefully go exploring with iNaturalist once you learn all about it tonight, and start racking up those observations for us. We are a nonprofit, so we do rely heavily on our supporters to continue to do our mission and our work in the field. I know there are a couple of supporters on the line here tonight, and I want to offer my personal thanks. It means a lot for those who are supporting us. So if you're not currently a supporter, I encourage you to go look at our website about all of the work that we do, not just programs like this one. And hopefully that will inspire you to become a supporter as well. So real briefly, a little bit about what I'm going to cover tonight. What is iNaturalist? Why should you use it? How to use it? How it works? And then some ways that you can participate in it. It's pretty straightforward stuff, and we're going to cover both the mobile app and the website in the how to use it section. And you might think it a little bit odd that I'm leaving the how it works sort of to the end of the presentation, but this section is a little bit more technical, and I think it's helpful if you see the program in action before we dive into sort of the deeper end of it and get into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty. So that'd be great. Can I just ask everybody to double check and make sure that their microphones are muted? I will stop for questions throughout, and I ask you, if you think of a question, put it in the chat box, and I'll stop throughout the presentation and look in the chat and see what questions are there. Since we are a smaller group, at the end, maybe the last question section, I'll let people unmute and ask questions out loud instead of typing them in. I understand for this kind of a program, some of the questions might be a little bit harder to type into the chat box, but feel free as we're going along to type them in if you can, and I'll stop and answer them throughout the presentation. So what is iNaturalist? The website itself, iNaturalist.org, gives three kind of technical explanations for what they are. An online social network to share biodiversity information, a crowdsourced species identification system, and an organism occurrence recording tool. And I know that sounds very formal, and we're going to break all three of those things down as we go through this tonight to see how to use the app and how it works, and this will kind of all make sense. But one of the key things about this is if you haven't already done it, you'll need to set up an account to use it. Don't worry, if you don't have one yet, you won't need it for the presentation tonight. But basically, you either need to go onto their website at iNaturalist.org or download from the App Store or from Google Play, their app. This is the icon down here on the lower right side. So you can see what it looks like. It's kind of this green floaty bird. And if you've already set up an account through the website, you'll sign into the app with the same account information. You can sign up for an account from the app as well, and it works both ways. So once you're logged in to the app and you're logged in online, all of your observations and information will sync between the mobile version and the web version. And that's really useful because the web version, as you'll see, has a lot more functionality than the mobile app does. And the mobile app is fantastic, and it's really cool to use in the field, but there's a lot of things that are much easier to do on the website, and we'll go through both of those as we go through. A brief history, and I'm not going to read all of these, you can sort of read there, but it is a relatively new thing. It's only about 12 years old. It was started as this master's project, and I would say really it's probably come into its own in the past 5 years or so in terms of getting enough data into the system to be useful for people making identifications in the field. When I first started using it, it was horrible in some respects. If you didn't know what you saw, it was really hard to make an identification. And now it's kind of scary how accurate it is some of the time. So it's learning all the time behind the scenes, and that's part of what makes the system work really well. Now it's operated as this joint venture between the California Academy of Sciences and National Geographic. So it has support, it has resources, and hopefully for those of us who are using it, it's going to be a long time out there and won't be going anywhere soon because of the resources that it now has behind it. But 3 things that you do need to know about it. It's global in coverage. So if you travel across the states or across the world, you can add observations from anywhere to your account. So keep that in mind. It's free. All parts of it, all the time. It's free to you to use. There are also some educated resources on there if you are a homeschooler or a teacher. And if you are a homeschooler or a teacher and are interested in using it, please talk to me, because that's something, shoot me an email. It's something that we're interested in trying to explore a little bit with teachers that might be in our area. So keep that in mind. And then it's also open access. So if you're a programmer and are interested in helping from the programmatic point of view, I encourage you to check out those resources on the website and look into that as well. So one of the key parts of iNaturalist is really about this idea of sharing biodiversity information. And this is an image from a presentation that the folks at iNaturalist actually put together. And I think it does a really, really good job of summing up that idea of biodiversity information. You can see in this rather small image, sunglasses there in the picture for scale, they're pointing out 7 different plants that are growing. And the quote here, "We can't protect and manage what we don't know," is absolutely true. And so on the back end of this, when you go in and you use iNaturalist as an individual user and you start capturing information about what you're seeing and where and when you're seeing it, that allows researchers and land managers on the back end to use that data to help inform their research and decision-making about the lands that they're managing and protecting. And that is something that we at Wissahickon Trails do as well. And I'll show you a little bit about how we do that throughout the presentation. So it is really important for me personally to get as many people using iNaturalist as possible and regularly on all our different preserves, because I can see that information and it helps me and helps me inform our conservation team about things that are on our preserves that we might work to protect. So observations, you've heard me use that word a lot. Observations are the lifeblood of iNaturalist. So each one of these things here is an observation. On your homepage of observations, this is my homepage of observations from the website. It'll show a map where you've made observations in the world. And an observation is literally just a recording of an encounter of an individual organism at a particular time and location. And something that's important to keep in mind when you're using iNaturalist is that repeated observations of the same things are completely acceptable and actually a really good idea. Don't think that you only have to put something into the system once. It's important for those of us using the data on the back end to know that you saw the species at 2 different locations or at the same location at 2 different times of the year. And so that really gets at that organism recurrence recording tool that iNaturalist says is one of their goals. And so it really helps us to have users not just put things in one time. Put it in every year that you see it. Put it in at every different trail that you're on that you see it. Because collecting that massive amount of data is much more useful than a couple of little individual points. So what does an observation consist of? Well, to make an observation in iNaturalist, you have to have the following. You have to have the who. So here I'm logged into my iNaturalist account. This is a website screenshot, but the app works the same way. And we'll get into the nitty gritty of that in a second. But it has to know who I am. So I have to be logged into the system. It has to know when I saw it. So when I actually observed the occurrence of this organism. And you'll notice it dates things 2 different ways. It dates things as here's when I observed it and here's when I submitted it. So you can actually go back and add historic data. If you have, so for example, the previous slide where I showed you, I'm going to actually bring it up to show you this. This was a trip that I took to Sweden 2 years ago, and it was a birding trip, and I was really far behind in going through all my photos and cleaning things out, and I realized I had put stuff that I had taken cell phone photos of, but I never put the birds that I took with my DSLR camera. I never put them in iNaturalist. So I spent the weekend doing this and so you can see here, the date observed is actually September 1st, 2018, but I actually didn't put it in. So until the 30th of August, 2020, 2 years later. So if you have old data, you have old pictures of things, if you're a bird watcher, things from your yard, if a fox visited or, a groundhog or whatever, you can put that in as long as you know where the photo was taken and what the original date was. So that gets at the where, and it will map it for you. And then you have to have the evidence. And for iNaturalist, evidence consists of either a photograph or a sound recording. So you can record a bird song, for example, and you can upload that. iNaturalist won't take videos. It will only take screenshots. But if you have a video, you can pull a screenshot out of that and then upload the screenshot to the system. It's you can just put lists of things in there without the evidence, but it will never take that observation to the highest level of data quality, which we will get into towards the end of the presentation. So what they really want you to have a photograph or a sound file to make the file as complete as possible. And then when you're looking at individual observations, there's also an area to add details or notes. So if you have specific notes about something that you saw or a question that you might have about it, you can put that in there. Community ID is another very important part of the system, and that's what we're going to talk about in the how it works section at the end, because that's really where that comes into play. And then we're also going to talk about projects. And so this screen on the website will show you if your observation is in any projects or give you an opportunity to add it to a project. And I'll explain what that means as we go forward. You can also enter evidence of species. So maybe you see a beaver tree like this one here in the middle that's all chewed, and that's a very distinctive way that a beaver chews a tree. But you never actually see the beaver. That's okay. You can put in the evidence, the beaver tree. So tracks, shed antlers, those kinds of things are all acceptable. Scat as well. If you find scat and you know, coyote scat and fox scat and deer scat can be very distinctive. So you can enter that as evidence of species. It does help when you're entering things like scat or prints to have something that you can gauge size with. So it's useful to carry a notebook that might have a ruler in it, or know how big your hand is and be able to put your hand next to the print and then put in the notes section when you're entering that information that, you know, the hand in the picture is 8 inches from the wrist to the top of the middle finger or something like that, because that's going to help confirm that identification. And it's okay if you don't have that, but it's often helpful particularly for things that aren't the actual animal, just to confirm that observation. So why should you use it? Well, at its most basic level, it's going to help you identify something that you saw and keep track of it, because it's all going to be in your account and you can go back and look and reference that in later years. So if you don't know what some kind of flower is, or you don't know what some kind of insect is, and you put a picture of it in iNaturalist, iNaturalist will help you identify that. So at its very basic, that's, you know, what you can do. And as we go through, you'll see how that actually works. But maybe you want to see what's being seen in your area. Maybe you've heard about some particular insect or a bird or a flower that you want to try to see. Well, iNaturalist can actually help you find that organism, if you will. There's each of these colored dots here is actually an observation in iNaturalist. This map was kind of centered around Ambler. So you can see all of these dots that have been made in our area. The colors of the dots sort of represent different taxons, so plants versus insects and birds and those kinds of things. So if you zoom in and drill down, you can, these dots on the website are clickable. So you can click and see what that observation actually was. So if there's a particular animal that you're looking for, you could search for that, and you could see where the observations have been made and what time of the year they've been made in our area. So that's another way that you can utilize it. And then lastly is by using iNaturalist, you're contributing to research. And this is a little bit more invisible to most people that use it, but know that there are researchers out there that are using it. This is an example that iNaturalist provides, but it's a search of a publications database for publications that use iNaturalist data. And you can see here the search results, as I think this was of the middle of last year, 765 papers have been published using iNaturalist data. And so that's a really important tool for a lot of researchers out there. And as I said, it's an important tool for organizations like us that are trying to manage properties to understand what's out there. So projects are one of the ways that researchers or land managers or whomever actually really can pool observations from multiple observers. And these kind of fall into sort of 3 broad categories. Events-based things like the City Nature Challenge here, which we're going to talk in much more detail about towards the end of the presentation. Also subject-based things. So this is an example of a new project that was just set up. It only has 26 observations so far, but this is looking for evidence of creatures that are eating spotted lanternflies in our area or anywhere in the US, but for right now, that's mostly our part of the country here. So if you find a spider web that has a casing of a spotted lanternfly in it, or you see a bird eating a spotted lanternfly, try to get a picture of that and put it into iNaturalist, and you can upload your observation to this project. Or the projects tend to be location-based, and this is what the projects that I have running are. So there's a project for each one of our preserves, there's a project for the general area of the watershed where we operate, and I can pull observations that people make based on that geography. So, and oh yeah, even though we haven't gotten to how the app works yet, you can look up projects in the app when you're using it on your phone, and when you go, it'll show you a list of projects that are nearby, so you can see if maybe there's anything that's relevant for you to use and to add your observations to. Projects work in a couple of different ways. A number of projects just automatically collect your data based on the parameters that the project owner has set up. So that's how my projects work for our preserves, for example. If you're on our Crossways Preserve and you upload an observation, I can see that on the other end. And City Nature Challenge pretty much also works the same way. That's a time bound. So it only is for these 4 days, and it's also geographically based, but it's very limited. But your observations are just automatically swept into that project. Some of them you actually manually have to add your observations. So like, for example, this spotted lanternfly, you actually have to physically click this button to add an observation to the project. And when you do that, the reason that they do that is because some of these projects have very specific rules about how they operate. And so if you see a project that you think is relevant to your observation, I encourage you to click on that project and like read the rules. There'll be terms and rules somewhere on that screen about what that project is and what kind of observations they're looking for. Some of them even go to the point like there's a Butterflies of North America project, and there's a subset that's a Butterflies of Pennsylvania project. You have to physically add your observation, and somebody from that project will actually confirm that what you are saying should go in that project is actually a butterfly, either a caterpillar or the butterfly itself. And then they'll approve your observation to be in the project. So you might not see it go into the project right away. There's a bit of a waiting period. And again, all projects are set up a little bit differently. So you need to take a closer look at some that you might think are relevant. For my projects, as I said, they're running in the background. They're geography based. You don't have to do anything. You can join them. There's a place, go back to the previous screen. If you look here, it's in really small blue letters up at the top of this spotted lanternfly project, but there's a button that says join the project. And you can click on that, and basically that'll give you updates about that project, should you choose to do that. You don't always have to join a project to add observations. Again, something to keep in mind. For my projects that are running in the background, you don't have to join. You don't have to upload your stuff automatically. Manually. I can see it automatically. For some reason, and I'm trying to fix this, it's not telling people that their data is in a project. And again, probably not that big of a deal for most people, but I know some people would like to know that their data is being used in a project. So I'm trying to fix how that shows up on people's screens and still lets it be that automatic kind of thing in the background. So I just want to give you some results from 2019, the first sort of full year that we had a data that was looking at this. And you can see here a number of our preserves and the number of observations that were made versus the number of species that we counted, and then the number of observers is the small gold bar on the bottom. And 4 Mills and Crossways Preserves led our observations, partly because that's where staff spends a lot of time. So there were a lot of staff observations in there, which is fine. We still count too, but I do want to get people out and using this a little bit more, besides just the staff members doing this. You can see from a taxon perspective, insects, the kind of teal, blue, green dots here, and then plants, which are the big orange dots here. They were the most number of observations came from those taxons. And that's actually not very surprising because most people, when they're out on a trail or in the field, they're using their cell phone, which is perfectly acceptable. You can get really good pictures with your cell phone, and particularly of things like insects and plants. And so that's where a lot of the observations tend to land. Things like birds and mammals, they're not encountered as often. And if you do encounter them, they're harder to catch with your cell phone, particularly in a photo that's usable. So this is not at all surprising, but I would like to try to encourage people to use their DSLRs to get out there and take pictures of birds or mammals that they encounter, and help get, you know, those numbers of observations up for those taxons. And then lastly, what I did was I looked at the number of observers, and I excluded staff from this result because our numbers were so far out of everybody else's. But what I tried to do was look at how many observations people were making, and the vast majority of people that actually had observations in 2019 in the system had less than 5 observations, which, as an iNaturalist user, and I'm now hooked on it, it's really hard for me to take a walk and not use it, because I'll see a flower, I'll see a bug, I'll see something, and I'll be like, okay, I have to take a picture for iNaturalist. And so less than 5 is not many at all. And again, this is kind of like my challenge to people that are on the webinar tonight, or people that may listen to this after our live presentation tonight, is let's see if we can increase these numbers for 2020. I understand we're, you know, later in the year at this point in 2020, but I still think that we have an opportunity to get people out in the field between now and the end of the year. And I encourage you to do things like trying to take pictures of birds. And if you have a DSLR, or even a point and shoot that's going to have a little bit more reach than a cell phone would, look for some of those things that maybe people don't get as many pictures of. And also try to cover some of the preserves that we don't have a lot of coverage for. We hardly have any results from our Willow Lake Preserve or our Briar Hill Preserve. And I will say the bridge over the creek now at Briar Hill is done, so you don't have to get your feet wet if you go there. So I encourage you to go and check out some of these other preserves. And you can find information on how to get to all of them and where to park and all of that kind of stuff on our website. There's a great interactive map feature there. So I encourage you to check that out if you're not familiar with these properties. But I really want to try to encourage people to get out there and do that. Also, I will say here at this point, if you don't use your name, your full name, or a reasonable approximation of it as your username, please consider, and you'll see this when I go to the website, please consider adding your name to your profile page, because we would love to figure out a way to try to recognize folks who are contributing to our projects. And, you know, if you go out there and you make 250 observations between now and the end of the year, we want to try to have a way to kind of reward that somehow. But I've got people in the system right now with, you know, usernames like Bluebell123, and I have no idea who they are. So it's helpful if you can, you know, add your name to the profile and make sure that, you know, there's a way to contact you in there, and that would be really helpful. And again, I like to reiterate, you don't have to observe something only once. If you go out and you see a particular flower at our Crossways Preserve and at the Willow Lake Preserve and at Briar Hill, put them all in. That's really going to be helpful to me when I'm trying to do these kinds of project summaries and look at the actual individual breakdown of species that people are reporting, and having those observations from all the different parts of the properties will be really helpful. So I'm going to stop real quick here for questions and see if we've got any questions in the chat. And then I'm going to dive into doing the deep dive into sort of how to use the app and how to use the website, because I know I haven't talked about that at all yet. So let's see. Nope, no questions yet. So I'm going to keep moving. Feel free to add questions as they come to you. And I'll be stopping again once we get through the sort of how to use it part of the presentation. So I'm going to start with the mobile app, because this is actually sort of the easiest and the simplest way to add an observation. So when you're out in the field, you can do this right away. You just open the app, and when you open the app, you get a screen that looks like this. So it's I'm signed in, so I know it's me. It gives you a total count of your observations, and it gives you the list of your most recent observations. And then you get this menu bar down at the bottom. So it's got Explore, and this is where you can see what species have been seen locally. I think this is also where you can see some of the projects that might be locally. Activity relates to these flags that you'll see here, and we'll get into this. Relates to the community identification, which we're not really going to talk about right now. So you really don't have to worry about that so much right at this particular point in time. There's an observe button, this camera here. You're on the Me tab, so okay, this is me. And then there's other settings and other things that you can explore through the More tab here. To make an observation, you want to click the Observe button. When you do that, you're going to get a screen like this that opens your camera, provided that you've given the app permission to open your camera. And there's a couple of things that you can do. You can use the green button to take a picture using the camera on your phone. You can click on the photos icon down here to go to your camera roll and select a photo from there. Or you can click No Photo, which allows you to upload the sound file, for example. Or you can, in some cases, just make a list observation. It will never get to the highest data quality level, but say you want to remember that you saw a red-tailed hawk. You can add that as an observation without a photo, and we'll talk about the data quality part of it moving forward, but just know that it will never get to that highest level of data quality without the photo. So in my case, I very rarely use the app's photo camera. I just use my own camera app that I'm using on my phone, and so I almost always go to the camera roll to pick a picture. So once I've done that and selected the photo that I want to use, as soon as I click on that photo, this screen opens. And this is a caterpillar that I found on my fennel in my backyard a day or two ago. And so I'm going to use this to show you the identification. So I've got my picture loaded in here. Everything looks good. I click the next button. If I need to take it again, or I picked the wrong photo for whatever, or I want to take a different picture, you can click the retake button and it'll take you back to this screen. So here I click the next button, and then this screen pops up. And on this screen, what they call the details screen, I can see my picture that I've added here. If for some reason I need to get rid of that picture and start over, I can click the X and go back to adding a picture again. I can use this plus box here to add another picture. And there may be times when you have more than one picture to add for an observation. We'll talk about like trees, for example, or a flower. You might want to add a flower and a leaf. Sometimes you have two different views of an insect, and that can be helpful to make that observation. You'll see that it has already populated all of that information about where I am, when I am. It gives me the opportunity to talk about whether the thing is a captive or a cultivated thing, an organism. iNaturalist wants you to use things that are free, living, wild creatures. And we don't include things like rocks or water or trash or people or our pet dogs. They're not really helpful to the point of the system. Likewise, putting things in like from a zoo, or an animal in captivity isn't, or the flowers from your garden that you planted isn't necessarily the best way of showing that biodiversity information. So you can put things like that in, but what iNaturalist asks you to do is to mark it as captive or cultivated. So if you really want to put in your pictures of the elephant from the zoo, you can, but it would be most helpful if you mark that as captive. Or you want to put in the pictures of your flowers from your backyard, it would be helpful if you put that in as cultivated. And again, that just helps researchers sort out the things that were, planted by people or things that are free living in the wild. And then you can also access projects here as well. So what you really want to focus on this, you can also add notes, sorry. What you really want to focus on here is this is the magic what did you see button. And this is the part that sometimes I said is absolutely scary. So what I want to do is when I'm in the app, I want to click on that what did you see. And when I do that, then I will get this screen. And it will show my picture and it will have a space where I can actually type in looking up a species by name. And then it'll give me these options and it says, we're pretty sure this is in the genus Pepilo, the common swallowtail, and here are our top 10 species suggestions, and you'll get a list of suggestions. And then on this screen, if I click the I didn't screenshot this for you guys, but if you click this little I for information, it will pop up information about the species. It will give you some other pictures. Sometimes your picture might not look like the picture that they have. So like in this case, this is a caterpillar and this is showing me butterflies. How do I know that which one is which necessarily? So clicking on that I button will help you sort of narrow things down. Now, I know that this is a black swallowtail caterpillar, so I picked black swallowtail, and as soon as I click on that as my selection, it like picks it, and it pops up this screen. So it takes me back to the details screen. Now where that magic button was, it says black swallowtail. And I can add notes, I can do anything else that I need to do here, and then if I've got everything the way I want it, I hit the big green share button at the bottom and it takes me back to my home screen. It's now increased my observation number by 1, and you can see the black swallowtail here at the top of the list. So it's very straightforward in the field to use this, and it's really good. A couple of things to keep in mind for your phone settings. Making observations will be easier if you let your phone use location services while you're using the app. Let your phone geotag your photos. I know some people don't like to do that. If you don't geotag your photos, every time you make an observation, you're going to have to physically use a map. And I'm going to show you how to do that on the website. It's easier to do it on the website, in my opinion, than it is on the app. So I let my phone geotag my photos so that it just makes it faster if I want to upload while I'm in the field. If you want to upload when you're in the field, it's also helpful to let your phone use cellular data. If you're on a data plan where you don't want to do that, that's fine. You can still absolutely use all of the features of the app, most of the features of the app, without using cellular data. You won't be able to upload your observations until you physically get back into a place where you're on Wi-Fi. So if you're in a setting that has Wi-Fi and you can upload your data, your observations that way, that's wonderful. But if you don't, and you don't want to use cellular data, then when you get back home and you're in your own Wi-Fi environment, you'll physically have to go in and tell the app to upload your observations at that point. It won't do it automatically in the background. Okay, I saw a couple of questions come up, so actually, you know what? Let me go through the website version, and then we'll come back to some of the questions. So this is an example of my home screen from the website version, and what we're actually going to do here is we're going to leave the PowerPoint presentation for a second, and I'm actually going to share with you my online version of my website so that I can show you this in real time, because it's actually easier than trying to screenshot everything. So I'm going to stop sharing this, and no, wait, sorry, I need to share a different screen. Okay, John Tierney, I'm calling on you only because I know that you're on the call. Can you unmute yourself and make sure, let me know that you can see my website screen?
Yeah.
Okay.
I assume that's what I'm looking at right now. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Okay, so this is my homepage of my account on iNaturalist. And you can see there's a lot of things to do here. You can do a general exploration of stuff that's seen all over the world. You can go to your observations. Community is where things like people and projects list. So you can look for specific people. You can look for projects here. iNaturalist lets you make a journal. It lets you keep a life list. It does the life list for you automatically. I don't use a lot of these features, but there's lots of things in there that you can use. And so I encourage you to sort of explore that. Up here, you'll see if you add a photo, your icon, and there's a drop-down menu. Again, it covers a lot of the same things here. Also gives you your dashboard. So that takes you to a slightly different view of your observations. And what I'm going to do for you right now, and hopefully this is going to work, is I'm going to do some real-time uploading of observations. So this is something that I've actually found the website when I have a batch of things to upload to be faster and easier than trying to do each one by one in the app on my mobile phone. So I've even gotten to the point, so this works really well when I take pictures on my DSLR and I've got a card that's got my photos on it and I'm putting it in my computer anyway, and my photos are on my hard drive. This works exceptionally well to upload photos. I've actually found that now if I'm out in the field and I just want to make a lot of observations, I come home and I upload my cell phone photos as well this way because it sort of lets me batch upload everything. So it's helpful. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the big green upload button here at the top of the screen. And then it brings me to a screen that gives me import options and choosing files. So I'm going to choose the files here, and my files are on my desktop. So, and I want all of these, so I'm just going to pick all, and I'm going to open, and it's going to start populating my information. I'm probably taxing my system a little bit doing the video. No, it's not too bad. Okay, so you can see here's my observation. So I'm going to run through a couple of different features, and this sort of gives you an idea of the power of the system. So for first thing that I'm going to do for these, because I took all of these photos with my DSLR camera, which does not add GPS coordinates to each photo, I have to add the location. So what I'm going to do, because these were all taken in the same general area, I'm going to select all, and I'm going to go over here to the side, and it says I'm editing 9 observations, and I'm going to click on the location. And I'm going to get a map, and I'm going to zoom in. You can physically search for the location as well. I know all of these were taken in Cape May, and I know all of these were taken, well, most of them were taken in the area of South Cape May Meadows. So I'm just going to pick that as my starting point and tell it to update all my observations. So a few of these are really easy. This one I know was taken there. I just click on the species name. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I agree that's an eastern cottontail rabbit. So I just click on that and it adds my observation. I've already got my date and my time. This picture I threw in here to show you that it doesn't always have to be a great picture. I know the rabbit's really close. This bird, however, is not. And I can still click on the species name and it tells me, yep, it's pretty sure. And I know that's an osprey. So great, that one's in there. This one I want to add a note to. So I'm just using this as an example. This was Elise's turn, and I know that this one I'm going to move the location because this was actually out on the beach. So again, it doesn't have to be specific. I like trying to get it as specific as I can, but this one was a hatch year bird. And I know it because a parent brought it food. So I'm just going to make that note. I can't type. Again, this is a straightforward one. I'd agree that's an Atlantic ghost crab. This one was actually sort of more back along here, along the path. So update that. Okay. This one, I want to use this mushroom as an example. So I have no idea what mushroom this is, and I'm not very good at mushrooms. Birds I know, you know, rabbits are pretty straightforward. There's not very many to pick from in our area, but I do not know mushrooms. So this is one of those times where I don't know what this is. So I'm really going to rely on the system. So just like that I button on the app, I can click on view and it can take me to another website page, and it'll bring up the information that's in the system about these various species. I already did that ahead of time in prep for this presentation, and I gotta be honest with you, I still don't know what this is. So I'm gonna put this in as a higher level at the genus level, and we'll talk about what that means. I'm not gonna take this down to the species level because I'm not really sure. Now, iNaturalist will give you these clues. You see here the green that says visually similar, seen nearby. Sometimes you'll just get visually similar. And you can use that to help you narrow down your choices, but it's still, you know, I'm still not positive what this is, so I'm gonna just put it in as the genus level. And that's fine. It has implications, but it's fine to put it in at that higher level if you're not really sure. So this bee in the what was my point? Oh, I know what I want to do. Okay, so you can see the darker green outline. This observation is selected, but there's actually two things in this picture. There's the flower that the bee is on, and there's a bee. And I can pop this up so you can see it a little bit bigger. There's the bee, it's in a flower. And so ideally, I'd like to make observations of both of those. But an observation is only one organism at a time. So what I can do, since I've got my green highlighted thing here, is I can duplicate this observation. So it'll take all that information, the picture and the location and everything, and I can duplicate that. So now I have two of them. So this one, I can go in and I can say, okay, what is this? And I know from researching this ahead of time for sure, this is a hibiscus turret bee. They're a ground-dwelling bee, and they use hibiscus related flowers, which in our case here is a swamp rose mallow. So for this observation, I'm going to click the bee, and then I'm going to go to the next one, and I think it dropped it. Yep, it dropped in the flower as well. And I know that this is swamp rose mallow, so I'm going to pick that for that observation. And again, you don't have to do that. You can put in a note that says, hey, can somebody help me ID the flower too? And somebody may comment back when we talk about the community ID. They'll comment back, and then you can go duplicate it later and add that flower, because maybe you have no idea what that flower is, but you want to capture it. So again, that's a really good way to help get information from people who are also using the system. And that community aspect of it can be really helpful. And then the last thing that I can do, this is where the idea of different views comes into play. This is the same insect. It's sort of a front view and a back view, if you will, which may or may not be helpful for identifying. So for this one, I can do control click, And so now they're both selected, and there is a tool up here that says combine selected observations. So if I do that now, I have one observation that has two pictures. And I can go through and I can do the same thing. And I forget which one this, oh no, I know. So it is actually this top one here, which I can't pronounce because it's just a Latin name for the species. I did this view before, and the common thread-waisted wasp, even though it looks very similar, has a red back that this insect does not have. So I'm going to select this one. And again, I encourage you to use those views. I don't want to destabilize my system any more than I have to right now. So again, that gives you, but those view options give you a lot of things to pick from. Oops, I forgot the species name here. Wow. Okay, I have to be honest, saying this is giving me a different list of options than it gave me before for this species. So I'm going to put this in as the genus. When I did this before, it gave me an option that one was a Halloween pennant, and that's not what's coming up right now. So I'm going to pick the genus, and the crowdsourcing ID may help me get that down to the species level. So then when you're done, which I can't get to, hold on, let me minimize my screen. So I can submit all my observations. And so I'm going to submit 9 observations, and it'll go through saving them, and then it should take me back to my home page. And I can see all my observations there. And it comes up with this needs ID, which we're going to talk about in a second. So that gives you an idea of how to go through the website. And like I said, that batch edit process is a lot faster once you get the hang of it than adding individual observations from your cell phone a lot of times. So I've started even using it for cell phone pictures. Okay, so let me go back. No, come on. I want to go back to sharing my presentation. Okay. Now, okay, so that just gives you sort of a brief overview of the website and the functionality of it and how to use it. We covered a little bit of this already, but what if I'm not sure what I saw? So upload it anyway with the highest level ID that you can give it. iNaturalist usually returns results in 2 different ways. One is what you saw a lot of in the website observations. We're pretty sure that this is in this genus, and here's our top 10 suggestions. So like this idea on the right that says, yeah, you know, we're pretty sure that we know what this is. The other way that they return results when you're looking to ID something that says, we're not confident enough to make a recommendation, but here's our top 10 suggestions. And sometimes if you click the I or the view button in that website version, you can use these suggestions and figure out what it is. And they can usually be pretty good. Sometimes you still have no idea. And honestly, like this fly, this is a very small fly that I took a picture of, and none of these options that it's giving me seem like what it is. So I'm probably going to have to resort to just putting this in as an insect, or maybe I can get it to the next level and say it's a fly, and see if somebody can help me identify it through the community identification process. Option of last resort, if you really aren't sure what to call it, you can leave the ID field blank and it'll go into the system as unknown. And again, the idea is that the community part of this, the crowdsourcing of identifications, will help try to figure out what that is. And real quick, how to make better observations. So sometimes it's simply a matter of not having a good enough picture. So take better photos, get as close as you possibly can, make sure your photo's in focus. If you're using your phone, make sure your lens is clean, and just really work to try to get the best picture that you can get. Shoot multiple angles. Like I said, sometimes you can get a different view of insects, that kind of thing. And for things like trees, take a picture of the flowers, the buds, the flowers if they're open, the bark, the leaves if they're there. Because sometimes there's a lot of species that unless you have all of those elements, you actually can't get down to the species level of identification. So make sure all your metadata is accurate and complete, and be sure to mark any captive or cultivated items as such, and then submit multiple observations if your photo contains more than one species. So like the idea of an insect on a flower, submit 2 identifications, one for the insect and one for the flower. If you so desire, the reason I have this in here, this weird looking picture here, you can actually, if you have a DSLR camera and you want to very quickly add things up, sometimes what people do is take a picture of the LCD screen on the back of their camera with their phone. And that's what I did here. This was in Eastern Towhee that was in my backyard, and I wanted to put it in iNaturalist really quickly and easily. So I just took my camera and took a picture of the LCD screen on the back and then uploaded that picture to iNaturalist. And that works well as long as the picture is good enough for identification. Okay, so I'm going to stop here for questions, and then we're going to sort of move into the more how it works section, and go a little bit deeper. So I know that there's a few here. Let's see what we've got. Oops, start. Okay, all right, so somebody asks, for plants, what's the best way to photograph it? Leaves, bark, stem, flower? Yeah, as much as you can get. If you have something that you can use as a scale, that you can take notes on how big something was, that can be helpful as well. When birding, should we put observations in iNaturalist and eBird? So yeah, that's a tough one. The systems are not connected. They're not managed by the same organizations at all. So unfortunately for birds, if you are an eBird user and you want to put stuff in iNaturalist, yeah, you're going to have to put it in both places. So, that's great. A lot of times with bird, the thing about using eBird, for those who aren't familiar with it, eBird doesn't require you to have a photo. eBird will just take the birder's word for it that that's what they saw. And there are quality control checks in place within eBird to try to make sure that the observation of that bird reported is true, but it doesn't require any photographic evidence, where iNaturalist does require photographic evidence. So in theory, you can take your eBird list essentially and put it in iNaturalist without photo evidence, but you'll never get to the highest data quality assessment that iNaturalist gives out. And again, that may or may not matter to you. It can be helpful, to researchers to some extent, but some researchers won't look at anything that's not at that highest data quality level. So again, it's optional, for you to do. From my perspective, the way that it works, I can see eBird. Anybody can go onto eBird and see observations that have been put in eBird and lists. So I use both when I'm doing year-end summaries. I use both iNaturalist and eBird. It'd be great to have all the birds in iNaturalist, just to have everything in one place, but I understand that they may not always get there. Is there an issue if you guessed wrong on the identification? No, absolutely not. And we're going to get into why that is in a second. So please do not stop yourself from putting in an identification because you don't know what it is. Because in some respects, that's the whole point of the system. Yes, so somebody else says, should you share observations if you're not sure they're correctly identified? Absolutely, completely. Oh, and somebody points out if taking pictures of leaves, there are apps which ID plants, trees, and bushes by taking picture of the leaf in the app. They recommend Leaf Snap app. Yeah, there's ways that you can ID stuff without using iNaturalist. For sure, if you want to have a higher level of confidence that you're identifying something correctly, sure, absolutely. Use some of the outside apps to help you do that. You can use Merlin for bird identification tips and things like that for sure. But don't feel bad if you're putting something into iNaturalist that you don't know what it is. That's perfectly acceptable, and that's what we're going to get into next. So that's all the questions from here. Whoops, sorry. Okay, so you may have seen in my list of, actually, I don't think any of the lists of my observations that came up showed this. So the idea of data quality, or what we call getting to research grade, this is what iNaturalist uses as its data quality assessment. And so the highest level that you can have on your observations is this green research grade flag. When you put your data in, all observations go in as casual. And when you add information such as the date, the location, a photo or a sound, and it's not a captive or cultivated organism, then that observation will move to needs ID, and that will have a yellow flag that says needs ID. Casual grade, so this is where like the bird list idea comes in. You could put your birds into iNaturalist without a photo, but it will never move out of casual grade, because in order to even get to needs ID, it has to have a photo. And then so to get to research grade, it has to have everything. It has to have that needs ID level. So if you don't have a photo, it will never move out of casual. And for your own personal purposes, that's okay. For researchers who are trying to use the data, most of them aren't going to use casual observations. And a lot of cases, they won't actually even use needs ID observations. They will only use the research grade ones. And again, I don't mean to say that to stop you from adding casual observations. You can, but the goal of the system is to try to get all of the observations to research grade. And there's this really long explanation that says observations become research grade when the community agrees on a species level identification or lower, i.e. when more than 2/3 of the identifiers agree on a taxon. I know that sounds really confusing, and that's okay. We're going to explain it in the next couple of slides. The important thing to remember here is the 2 out of 3 rule. And this will become clear as we go and do this. So take a step back for a second. We have to think about taxonomy. So go back to science classes in high school and think about, the idea of kingdoms and phylums and classes and orders and families and genuses and species. iNaturalist wants to get every observation to the species level, which is the most specific level of identification that you can have for an organism. And so what it does is it crowdsources those identifications, and it takes the most specific identification following that 2 out of 3 rule will take precedence. So if you enter a generic ID like bird, you will see the community make that ID more specific most of the time. So like the mushroom that I entered, when I entered it at the genus level, I'm counting on the community to try to help me get to that species level. Some things, like I said, the fly, I may have to go back to, the phylum or the family and get a much, much broader thing to actually put my ID in the system, and then again count on the community to try to help get it to that more specific level. So I'm going to walk through a couple ways. The first easiest, most simplest way that a community identification happens is you put in an observation that you're fairly confident that you know what it is, and somebody agrees with you. So in this case, I put in an observation and I suggested an ID that was silver spotted skipper. And this user, I can't even, Mark Twain, suggested an ID that also said silver spotted skipper. So that made my observation move to research grade. 2 out of 3 people identified, agreed with the same species level identification. So my community taxon got a green bar and it says 2/3 agreed, and we're all good. And that's the most straightforward way that it happens. And most of the time when you put stuff in, especially if it's stuff that you're fairly confident that you know what it is and you've already, you put it in as a species level identification, this is what happens. One person, maybe 2 other people will agree with you, and it moves to research grade and it's no problem. Where it becomes a little bit more of a give and take, and I have to say, this is the part of the system that actually really confused me at first when I started using it, because I would enter an observation and I would be on my phone and iNaturalist would suggest something that I knew was correct, like silver spotted skipper. So I'd put it in. And I couldn't understand why people were IDing something that I already knew what it was. But I knew what it was. But iNaturalist doesn't know that I knew what it was. So that's why you have to have somebody else confirm your identification to take it to that research grade. Even though you are absolutely positive that you know what species that is that you put into the system, iNaturalist will always have somebody come along and say, yes, I agree with you, and move it to research grade. And it won't move to research grade unless somebody does. So, iNaturalist doesn't know what I know, so it has to rely on the community to confirm that. So this is a very simple example. This is a lot of how this works, especially if you make the correct, even if it's a guess, but you've used that information tool in the app, or you've used the view finder on the mobile or the website version, and you're pretty confident that you're picking the right species, somebody will agree with you. It gets more complicated when you put things in at a higher level or when people don't agree. So I'm going to kind of walk through an example of that on the next slide. So, sorry, I had highlights here. So yes, somebody agreed with me. My community taxon moved to 2 out of 3, and I'm good to go. I'm following the rule. It's research grade. So the second level of community identification is a little bit more confusing. And so say a user named Adrienne, I think it's Adrienne4, posted an observation that contained this image. Adrienne4 user is not sure what this is. And we're focusing on the insect here, not the plant. I'll just say that up front. So they're not sure what it is. So when they go to make their observation, they put it in at this very broad level of insect, the class level of insect, which is going to include all kinds of insects, butterflies, bees, ladybird beetles, it includes everything. So it's very broad. And iNaturalist said that's fine. That's where you can start, but we want to try to get it to that species level. So they put, the first user that uploads this puts it in as this insect, the class of insects. That's what they call the main ID, because that's the only identification that it has right now. So another user comes along and says, oh, I see that this one, it isn't research grade yet, so it needs to have a more specific identification made. Well, Bunny Bee says, well, this is a ladybird beetle, so I'm going to suggest this identification. And that's fine. This won't change the main identification level. It'll still say insect, because we have 2 observations now and 2 people disagree. So it will keep what was originally put in. Because Bee Bunny didn't go to the species level, they only went to the family level. So 3 other users come along and say, oh, okay, I see that this still needs an identification at the species level to move to research grade. And these 3 users come along and say, well, I think it's a 7-spotted ladybird. Adrienne Fuller looks at it and says, well, maybe I think it's actually a 3-banded ladybird. iNaturalist will default to the 7-spotted ladybird as the identification, and it will change the identification from insects to 7-spotted ladybird because 3 people now agree that that's what it is. Now, I will say it does mean that sometimes there are wrong identifications in iNaturalist. But it is something, there are forums on iNaturalist, there are ways to, if you think something is really wrong, I don't know, for example, if we have any mushroom experts on the call tonight, but if mushrooms are your thing and you're looking at some things that have been misidentified, there are ways to help communicate that and, you know, make sure that things get the proper identification. The vast majority of times, this system works. And if people are really disagreeing about things, you will see comments on your observation page. So that whole where, actually, if I go back to the previous slide, nope. Okay, if I go to this slide, under this activity part of your observations on the website, and this is what's sometimes hard to see on the mobile app, it will be there, but it's a little less obvious. And that's where those little red flags come in that I showed you off to the side. One of the things that I like about using the website is it's just easier to view a lot of this information. So if there's disagreements about your observation or disagreements about what somebody else has suggested as an identification, people may ask questions there. They may ask, do you have any other pictures? Do you know what plant it was on? Do you have any other information that can help us narrow this down? And so it does pay for things that observations that you put in that you notice aren't going to research grade. Pay attention to the activity around them and see if people have asked questions, see if people are disagreeing about the identifications and sort of what the issues are. Because that's a really good way to engage with the community around, you know, getting things identified. So put this one back up. So now that observation would now have an identification, a research grade level identification of 7-spotted ladybird because at least 2 out of 3 people agree on that species level identification. So sometimes you can't get there. This is an observation that I put in that still is showing this yellow needs identification flag, even though I have 2 out of 3 people agreeing with an identification. And the reason why is because it's at the family level. This is an inchworm caterpillar. They're really hard to identify. And so I may never get a more specific ID than this. Somebody agreed with me that yes, it's a geometer moth caterpillar, but we don't know what moth it belongs to. So I can't get to that species level identification. And when this happens, there's a couple of things that you can do here. You can do absolutely nothing, and that's fine. You can just leave it alone, and sometimes an expert or somebody more expert will come along and be able to identify that caterpillar to the species level. And then, you know, it'll still be waiting for somebody else to ID it, but either you can agree with them or somebody else can agree with them, and you can get it to that species level. Sometimes it can help you, this is where the project idea comes in. Sometimes it can help you to look for a project that is related to whatever observation you're trying to make. So maybe it's a geographical thing, maybe it's a specific project, maybe there's a moth project that I could put this into that would get it in front of an expert to help me identify this. And so that's something that I could think about doing, is going and searching for some moth projects that are out there and relevant to my area of geography and where I saw this observation, and see if I can add this and they might be able to help me get it to research grade. And the last thing that I just want to mention, because you may have seen this on the app. So iNaturalist has a couple of ways of dealing with what we call geo-privacy. So how the location shows up. So there's 3 ways that you can do this. Open, everybody can see where it is, and the point shows up on the map pretty close to wherever the photo was taken, or where I, like when we were using the website, where I located those photos on the map. Everybody can see it. And generally speaking, I would suggest that probably that's really where you want to be. You can obscure things, and there's a way to pick this as a selection when you're making in the app or in the website. You can obscure the location. And what this does is it's shown sort of as a random point within this box. It's a 0.2 by 0.2 degree area. So you can see relative on this map here on the right, sort of this box. And so it'll randomly put a point in that box that, you know, those true coordinates are within. So sometimes people like to do this for their house, for example, so people can't see exactly where they're posting things from their house. It's up to you. Private, the coordinates are completely hidden, and that makes the observations less useful for people, because then I don't know, like, for example, my observations for our preserves are based on geography. And so if the coordinates are completely hidden, your observations aren't going to show up in my project. So they either need to be open or obscured. Now, there may be times when it is, for some reason, you know, you need to completely hide the coordinates for an observation. That's okay, you have that option, but I wouldn't recommend it unless there's a really, really good reason. iNaturalist will automatically obscure threatened or rare species. It won't give you the exact location. So if you go and put in, you know, I don't know, a California condor, it's going to obscure that observation because that's a threatened and very rare species, for example. And so, you know, you can keep that in mind as you're making your observations. So I'm going to stop here for another round of questions. I did see a couple here. Somebody says, I have a couple different bird types in my backyard. They're all wild, but I do feed them. Should I upload the pictures to iNaturalist? Yes, they're wild birds. So there's a chance that even if you didn't feed them, that they would still pop into your backyard. Maybe you have a shrub that has berries. Maybe you have a tree that makes nuts that they like to eat. Or they might come searching for insects in your tree. So yes, absolutely. The birds are wild, so they can be added to iNaturalist for sure. And that's all the, oh, wait, one more popped up. Let's see. Nope, I got them all. Okay. So lastly, I just want to talk about some very specific ways that you can use iNaturalist. Obviously, I would like you to use it every time you're out there walking on our trails or in our preserves and making as many observations as you possibly can to help me and help our conservation team for the land management challenges that we have. So, you know, that's one way to use it, and I really do encourage you to spend some time doing that. But there are a couple of very targeted things that happen that are really great ways to participate. So City Nature Challenge is a global competition that takes place every year, and you'll notice the Philly is in parentheses there because we participate for the Philly part of the City Nature Challenge. So cities are divided up across the globe, and we have the organizers for the Philly area have defined Philly as all the counties that are highlighted there. So in Pennsylvania, it's Philadelphia County, Delaware County, Montgomery, and Bucks County. And then in New Jersey, it's Burlington, Camden, and Gloucester County. And the reason why is because they did this is because Philadelphia as a county and as a city compared to some other cities around the world, is actually a very small geographic area, and it's very urban. And so what they did was they defined the area a little bit broader so that it gives us a higher level of participation. It's a two-part kind of competition. The first part is the observation part, which in 2021 will take place April 30th to May 3rd. It's a Friday to a Monday. And then there's the ID period, which takes place over the next week. And so we encourage everybody to go out, and usually what happens in non-COVID years is organizations from the area, ourselves included, have a walk or two that we actually say, okay, we're going to meet at this preserve and we're going to do, you know, an iNaturalist kind of bio blitz of the area for the City Nature Challenge. And so you can participate in a lot of different events that happen during that time, or you can go out on your own. And this is one of those projects that you don't have to join. If you make an observation during this time period in this geographic region that's highlighted, it will be captured in the project. So in 2020, because of COVID, things got changed a little bit, and they kind of eliminated the competitive part of the system, and they just really wanted everybody to get out and enjoy nature and the healing power of nature and be outside. And so there was no winning cities for 2020. Hopefully in 2021 we'll be able to go back to the competitive side of things. Philly actually in 2019 did very well for the city of its size. We were beaten, I think, in most categories of observations. You get observations, number of observers, so we want as many people to participate as we can, and then species. And we were like third and second, and we kept coming in behind Cape Town, South Africa. And so we want to try to really challenge them in 2021, and hopefully we'll be able to get back out as teams and really blanket the area. So mark these dates on your calendar. Keep an eye on our website. There will be more information as we get closer to that date. If we're able and hopefully able to do in-person programs again, you know, we'll be doing that. And certainly you can go out on your own. More information about the Philly part of it can be found at this website, the cncphilly.org. Has a lot of information. And then what goes hand in hand with that is now we've added a fall bio blitz. So the Southern Hemisphere of the world pointed out, rightfully so, that when we do City Nature Challenge, we've taken a very North American view of things because we've set it up to be in the spring, which is kind of when our greatest levels of biodiversity start to happen. For them, that's the fall. And so it's not as active in some areas. So they brought up the idea of having a fall bio blitz, and it's not going to be as formal a process, if you will, as the City Nature Challenge is, but we are going to have a fall event. Now, given the dates of this, it's unlikely that we'll be able to do in-person things, but I really do encourage you to go out between September 25th and September 28th. In those counties, and in my case, particularly in Montgomery County, and particularly in the areas of the Wissahickon trails and preserves, because this will be a really good opportunity for us to capture some of the fall organisms that are out there that we might not capture if we didn't have a lot of people out there. So encourage you to really get out there on as much as you can during those 4 days and make observations. The other thing that I want to mention about this, and we kind of touched on this, you can absolutely feel free to go through and make observations for other people. So, and help them get to research grade. So say, for example, you're a birder and you know the birds of the area. There is a way on the website to go through and look at observations that need to get to research grade, that don't have an identification yet. And you can narrow it down to say, I only want birds, and I only want birds that are in Pennsylvania. And you can make it that specific. And you can look at the pictures that people have and the observations that they've made, and you can agree with them or suggest a different identification if they're not specific enough. And same with the BioBlitz and the City Nature Challenge. We need people to help make those observations, getting the research grade level observations made. So absolutely feel free to go in and look at observations and help people make them research grade by agreeing, suggesting an identification. And if it's not something that you're comfortable with because you don't really know plants or you don't really know birds or whatever, that's fine. It's okay to not do that. But if you are someone who, is a birder, for example, or maybe you really know plants or trees, please join in the crowd and add identifications as well. And the last thing that I wanted to mention is another app by iNaturalist called Seek. And this one is a little bit different. This one actually doesn't require an account of any kind. It lives entirely on your phone. It draws from observations that have been made on iNaturalist, but it doesn't automatically connect to iNaturalist. So this can be good for kids. Ideally kids under 13 are not supposed to have an iNaturalist account. Now they can with parental approval. There's a process on the website to go through to give that approval. But this can be great for younger kids that it uses the phone and it basically uses the GPS and the camera. And so it turns on your camera and you can point the camera at something and it will try to pop up an identification and tell you what that is. So it's more about exploration and learning based. You can earn badges, there's monthly challenges. You can link it to your iNaturalist account. You don't have to. If you do link it to your iNaturalist account, you still have to manually upload the observations. It won't automatically do it, but it gives you a mechanism to do that easily so that you don't have to come home and reload all of those photos that you've taken into iNaturalist. Again, I haven't really played a lot with this. It's relatively new. It's only been around for about a year, and I think it's had some growing pains, but I do see that iNaturalist is trying to make it better. They're adding more of these monthly challenges, adding badges and those kinds of things. So if you have young kids, this can be a good tool for them as well. Again, your mileage may vary. And what I will say is if you do happen to use this and use it with your kids and you get any handy tips or tricks that you think I should know about for the next time I do a training on iNaturalist, please feel free to drop me an email because this is it's not something that I've spent a lot of time with. So I'd be happy to have feedback from people who do. So that is my last slide. It is the last time for questions. We've got a dozen people on the line, so I would say if you want to unmute yourselves for a few minutes and ask questions in person, I'm happy to try and answer them. You can see here some of our upcoming events. So I'd like to highlight creek cleanups coming up soon. Usually we do this in the spring. It was rescheduled this year to the fall. There's still spots available. All the information about signing up for this is all on our website, so I encourage you to go take a look. The 15th, I'll be doing a program like this on monarch migration and tagging. And we're doing our walk the Wissahickon instead of a day, it's a week now, and there will be a variety of small led walks and hikes around the areas of our preserves and trails. Again, more information about that will be coming on the website when the walks will be and sort of the distances and those kinds of things. October 6th, all about salamanders, webinar like this, and then later in the fall, some webinars on vernal pools, backyard bird feeding, and all about owls, which is always a very popular one. So I encourage you to pay attention to our website and sign up for any of the things that feel, that you'd like to participate in. I don't see any questions in the chat box. So, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and we can talk through those.
No question, Christy, but good job.
Thanks. All right, well, I said an hour and a half, so we're at that point right now. So thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. Get out there and get those observations into iNaturalist, and I'll sweep them all into my projects, and we'll have fantastic numbers for 2020. So thanks a lot, and hope to see you at an upcoming event or program.
Thank you.